नमस्कार, गुड इवनिंग, अभिनंदन। ग्लोबल मीडिया एजुकेशन काउंसिल का ये ग्लोबल कम्युनिकेशन एजुकेशन कॉन्क्लेव भारत की आजादी के 75 वर्ष, जीएमईसी के इस आयोजन के भी 75 दिन, 75 मीडिया शिक्षकों का सम्मान, 75 भारतीय मीडिया विशेषज्ञ, 75 विदेशी विशेषज्ञ, 75 पॉलिसी मेकर्स, 75 डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज बेस्ड ऑन दीज लेक्चर्स और पुस्तकों, रिपोर्ट्स आदि का लोकार्पण, एक अभिनव प्रयोग वैश्विक स्तर पर, जहां हम मीडिया से जुड़े विभिन्न विषयों पर इस संवाद को आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं। और आज इस पूरे संवाद को कोऑर्डिनेट करने के लिए हमारे साथ मीडिया और मीडिया शिक्षा की एक युवा चेहरा, जो विभिन्न क्षेत्रों में पिछले कुछ वर्षों से सक्रिय है, हिमाचल प्रदेश यूनिवर्सिटी के जर्नलिज्म एंड मास कम्युनिकेशन डिपार्टमेंट की गोल्ड मेडलिस्ट डॉक्टर रंजना ठाकुर हमारे साथ में है। मूलतः हिमाचल की रहने वाली और शूलिनी यूनिवर्सिटी में पत्रकारिता विषय का पिछले 7 वर्षों से अध्ययन अध्यापन कर रही है। मीडिया के विभिन्न क्षेत्रों में आपकी सक्रिय रुचि रही है। आरजे के रूप में रेडियो की दुनिया में अपनी आवाज के जादू के माध्यम से युवाओं में जहां ये विशेष लोकप्रिय रही हैं, वहीं शूलिनी यूनिवर्सिटी की न्यूज़लेटर के प्रकाशन के माध्यम से भी ये न सिर्फ विश्वविद्यालय की छवि को बेहतर बनाने के लिए प्रयत्नशील है, वरन प्रकारांतर से विद्यार्थियों को भी शिक्षित प्रशिक्षित कर रही है। आज के इस पूरे आयोजन की संकल्पना डॉक्टर रंजना ठाकुर का है। मैं इनसे अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे आज के इस कार्यक्रम की शुरुआत करें। डॉक्टर रंजना।
सर, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। थैंक यू सो मच। Welcome everybody. A very warm good evening from the hills of Himachal. I'm in Solan right now in Shulini University, Solan, and I'm Ranjana Thakur, as introduced by Sanjeev Bhanawat, sir. I wish you a very warm welcome to this webinar. And first of all, I would like to invite our session chair, Professor Ravi Kedhar, to chair the session, and he will be giving an opening address. So before that, a brief introduction of Dr. Ravi Kedhar. So he is a postgraduate in English from the University of Jammu, India, and in journalism from Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla. Dr. Ravi Kedhar earned his doctoral degree in English from the Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, India, where he also began his career as a lecturer in English. He has worked in Punjab Agricultural University, Ludhiana, as an assistant professor of English and associate professor of journalism, apart from an overseas stint at the Ethiopian Civil Services University, Addis Ababa. Presently, he is professor of journalism and the director of Jagannath International Management School, Vasant Kunj, New Delhi, India. He is the founder editor of Mass Communicator, International Journal of Communication Studies. He has published 2 edited books, Indian Management, Theory and Practice, and Media in this World. He has also published his first collection of poems, The Chant of Vitasta, and his first novel, Orphans of the Storm. He has also come out with a book of mystical aphorisms, 101 Thoughts to Light Up Your Path, based on his experiences. He has also authored the book Evelyn Waugh Revisited, based on his doctoral research. He has been a member of the university court and is currently the member of the academic council of GGS Indraprastha University, Delhi. He has also
I think some network problem. I think network connection is not there. So we request Professor Ravi Dhar to address the audience.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhanawat. It's a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished galaxy of experts and speakers. The subject for today's discussion is crisis communication during the pandemic. Well, when we talk of crisis communication, am I audible, first of all?
Yes. Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk of crisis communication during the pandemic, so what we mean to say is how communication is crucial to the resolution of a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. And when we talk of communication, we talk of basically two essential issues. And I think these are two important elements of communication. One is the content of communication, which should attract attention, and the actors involved in the production of that content. As far as the content is concerned, again, it is of two kinds. One, the objective part, and the other, the subjective part. As far as the objective part of the content is concerned, that is the part related to the health information, which is essential for people to know so that they can protect themselves against the COVID-19 pandemic, the virus. The second part, which is the subjective part of this content, those are the narratives. Those are the narratives which circulated during COVID-19 pandemic. And these narratives, because when we talk of narratives, there's an element of subjectivity which gets projected. The narratives are determined by the ideological moorings of people as to which part of the world you are from, which section of the community you are from. So narratives are determined by your psychological predilections and prejudices. So that is the most tricky and dicey part. Then coming to the issues which emerge out of this kind of a potpourri of content, and let me come to the actors also. The actors, important actors who have played a role in this COVID-19 pandemic, during this pandemic, number one, the government, the most important player, and its agencies. World over, governments have played some role or the other, like taking decisions on lockdowns, taking decisions on compliances, what are called COVID-19 protocol compliances. Then the medical fraternity, the business and industry or the corporate sector, the NGOs involved in the process, and the medical fraternity. And I would also like to include media as also one of the actors. While media has not been just the purveyor of information or the distributor of information, but media itself has also taken on a role, because when it performs its gatekeeping function, it determines as to what narratives to valorize and what narratives to marginalize. So therein, the role of media also becomes significant. Now, out of this potpourri of actors and the various kinds of content which have circulated during the COVID-19 pandemic, there emerged certain issues. The first important issue, of course, has been the saving of lives, because immediately, suddenly, a threat emerged on the horizon and it took people by surprise. It led to the collapse of public health systems. What to speak of public health systems, even private health systems in the developed countries where you have private health sector in a big way. It showed that everything came to a grinding halt. They could not take on the the active caseload of patients who had to be admitted over there. The second was as to how to stem the tide, how to stop this, the ongoing, the bulldozing the wheels of this pandemic, which were refusing to stop, to come to a halt at any place, how to stop it, how to stop this movement. So that was the second issue. The second has been closely related to this is the compliances that were brought in. Compliances, whether in regard to the preventive measures to be taken by way of COVID-19 protocol, and then the vaccination. If most of you must have been following what has been happening in Europe and in America, there have been protests against these serial doses of vaccination. Countries saying, okay, initially saying first dose, then second dose, then now the third dose, booster dose, and some say now fourth, then fifth, and some even going to the extent of saying that now you need booster doses after every 3 months. And there have been hilarious comedies, satires on it on YouTube. There are famous people who, and there have been protests also, and some protests have gone violent also, where police has had to tear gas or even lathi charge people, to use batons against them to quell the protesters. And this is an issue of the individual's right to personal freedom, because the choices of the individual have been the vaccine passports, all these fall into this category. Then the third issue which comes to my mind is the setback COVID-19 has had for the unorganized sector in the developing economies, and the small and medium enterprises, not just in developing economies, but also in the developed West. Because whatever stimulus packages have been released during the COVID-19 pandemic, they have been for the corporate sector, not for the small and medium enterprises, the small pop and mom stores. So what were the communication strategies and how were their issues raised? Did anyone raise their issues? Did these issues make into the mainstream mass media? Then the fourth issue that comes to my mind is the printing of currency, which is something very disastrous. In America alone, around $4.3 trillion were printed during these 2 years of the pandemic, which is equivalent to the amount of money that was printed in the previous 100 years of American economy. So you can well imagine as to what kind of an economy is being created and what is going to be the fate of such currencies. So it is printing, you're printing paper. So this has been, and this has happened not just in America, it has happened in Europe, it has happened in many countries, depending on the scale. The scales have varied. So this leads to inflation, and inflation from the Austrian school of economics point of view, it is not just the rise in prices, it is also the volume of currency in circulation. When there is a rise in the volume of currency in circulation, that in itself, according to Austrian school of economics, that in itself is an indication of inflation, because the symptom that is in terms of the rise in prices could be stage managed. It could be managed in such a way that impressions are negated. The second...
Sir, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Yeah.
So we will continue this discussion as this was like planned as we will have this opening address by you. Then this discussion on this topic further, we will have...
I'm just raising the issues. Opening
okay.
as a part of the opening address. I'm not giving any comments.
All right.
I'm just
all right,
raising
all
the
right.
issues only, because I'm just laying bare
All right.
the topic, because my comments are not there anywhere.
All right, sir.
I'm just saying these are the issues which demand discussion and which call for attention. So the other is regarding the pricing of the currencies, because when you print more, so what is going to be the fate of the currencies? Then the buoyancy, the other element, the issue that has been very intriguing has been, while the economies have been in a mode of lockdown, the stock exchanges have been going up. The stock markets have been going up. So this is something very dicey, and it needs interpretation, it needs attention, it needs to be understood as to how this issue needs to be understood. And finally, the challenge as to, will this pandemic, this be the last wave? How many waves? Is it the final movement, or there are more to come? Because there have been reports in the media saying that the pandemic is not over, another virus is about to come. And recently there was a media report where the Chinese scientists said that there is another virus which needs only one mutation to infect humans. And if that happens, then 1 out of 3 people will definitely die. So these are issues and challenges, and there have been also many theories as to the origin of the virus itself. And this is not just in the media. The discussions have happened in the US Congress also, where people have been called for questioning. Fauci has been called. The director of the Communicable Diseases Board, she was called. And senators have questioned people who have been the main actors in this story as to who is responsible for the pandemic. And the senator went as far as saying to Fauci, do you not own responsibility for the outbreak of the pandemic, and should you not resign? So these are some of the issues and challenges which emerge, according to me, as far as the issue of the subject of this conference is concerned. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Now I would be introducing our esteemed chief guest, Shri Saugat Biswas ji. Shri Saugat Biswas is an IAS officer of the J&K cadre. He is Divisional Commissioner of Ladakh as well as Secretary, UT Ladakh. Among his other postings, Saugat Biswas has served as Deputy Commissioner, District Magistrate in districts like Anantnag, Leh, Rajouri, and Kishtwar in the state of J&K. Before joining as the first Divisional Commissioner of Ladakh Division in 2019, he has been Secretary, Information Technology in the government of J&K. Currently, in addition to his responsibility as Divisional Commissioner, Ladakh, he is also Secretary of 6 departments: Wizards, Disaster Management Relief, Rehabilitation and Reconstruction, Industries and Commerce, Information Technology, Transport, Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, and Civil Aviation in the Union Territory of Ladakh. He holds a bachelor's degree in zoology from Delhi University, master's in mass communication from AJK Mass Communication Research Center of Jamia Millia Islamia, and public policy from IGNOU and Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, that is LBS NAA. So I would request our esteemed chief guest to give us inaugural address. Welcome, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Global Communication Education Conclave for inviting me for this webinar. I would thank the organizers for Organizing this, I did not know it is such a beautiful idea to have a 75-day long program on communication. So now the subject, today's subject is crisis communication at the time, in the time of COVID. I have been, what should I say? I should say fortunate only to have managed COVID mitigation and COVID control issues in the Union Territory of Ladakh. It was in 2020, March. I think when the country went into lockdown on the 23rd of March or 24th of March, if I remember correctly, we rather preceded the lockdown in Ladakh. I think we locked down on the 18th of March. So, and that is when this communication for crisis management actually commenced. We all understand and we all know that these 2 years, and now almost touching 3, are years of misery for lots and lots of people across the globe. It was, a period of uncertainty. We all have had patients in our houses. Many of us would have lost, a near one. And it was a complete situation of dark. Nobody knew what this disease is about. We don't know. Even the doctors did not know. You talk to the doctors. Some doctors say something, the other says something else. People even to this day do not know the efficacy of the vaccination that we have undergone. So this lack of knowledge, there was no knowledge, number one, and there was no dissemination. So these were the two challenges, the biggest challenges, as if something has come from the blue and we are just, awestruck. So to come out of this and to deal with this, I think communication through whatever channels was possible actually, came to the rescue of people. It was a link. It was a complete link. People were dependent on the government for communication. The government was dependent on what is happening with the people, how they are reacting to the virus, what are the, the emergencies in the hospitals. Today we are getting masks for free. At that time, one mask was costing 150 rupees, 250 rupees. In places like Ladakh, I don't know what was I think it was almost the same across the country. So medical supplies were limited. We did not know how to prepare a PPE kit at that time. We were importing PPE kits. If anybody knows about this, we were propping up industries, giving them technologies to make PPE kits and produce PPE kits in India. I remember we got PPE kits from Ahmedabad. A company was propped up by the government to produce PPE kits, transfer technology, and then they were making kits. Medicines, vaccines, everything was, rushing from this place to the other. So this period actually was very much dependent, extremely dependent on communication. And I think one of the crisis periods in the modern times, which involved every kind of communication means, be it the television, the radio. The importance of radio, I don't know if it is still that important in the rest of the country, but in a place like Ladakh, we could feel the importance. Ladakh maybe has, say, about 40% of its area, which is without any kind of internet connectivity. So we don't have voice connectivity, we don't have data connectivity, but we have people. Similar places must be existing in other parts of the world, other parts of our country also. The only communication channel that existed was radio. So the kind of dependence to spread the message, to get feedback on radio was immense at that time. Then we saw how the social media channels, proved to be on both sides. Like my esteemed speaker, previous speaker was telling, miscommunication, wrong communication. WhatsApp was a big source of fake news, fear, wrong medicines. People were told not to take the regular medicines, take some strange concoction. So various kinds of wrong messages, fake news was appearing on WhatsApp. So now the counter propaganda against fake news was again through WhatsApp. At the same time, this new communication system that we never had seen earlier, the WhatsApp groups, which now the government sector is using immensely and extensively, was one place where all kinds of people would get together, be it the media, be it the government, be it the hospitals, the patients, opinion leaders, companies, suppliers, everybody. So that was also a place which was a melting pot of information for dissemination, for understanding, for decision making. All these things were there. At the same time, if you recollect, due to the lockdown, when the lockdown was being lifted, it was called unlock. Now the unlock also happened in various phases. And before the unlock, we all had our near and dear ones stuck up in this state, that state, somebody in foreign country. I remember I think this was the case with various other places also. We had pilgrims stuck up in Iran, and people had to be brought in special airplanes. And then they would be sitting in some Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, etc. in Air Force base camps. And they had to be given, and somebody in the base camp having say 400 people, 200 people would contact COVID, and there would be mayhem there. And then long distance communication, I don't know by what means we did not use at that time, creating instant WhatsApp group overnight to contact and talk to a group of 100 people waiting outside in a base camp in Jaisalmer. Right, so to tell them that calm down, we are coming, and getting them here. So there were various ways and various reasons for communication. It was not just to tell people that mask up, social distancing. That is just one part of the story. Then the stuck up students across the country. Every state got lakhs and thousands of students as soon as the unlock began. We had to contact the students. How do we do that? Internet comes to our rescue at that time. Websites, applications were developed. Almost every state developed apps. I think Kerala was if I remember correctly, maybe the first state which developed an application, and then we did an application. We called our application Ladakh Connect. And everybody who is outside the country, inside the country would connect through that portal and tell their grievances. Somebody did not have food to eat. Somebody was being ostracized. Somebody was being subject to stigma, regional stigma, various things. So, and the China angle, and many people in our country, because of the facial features, are also ostracized and stigmatized. So various kinds of communication, help, grievance redressal, connecting with the governments, every state government is connected to other, again in WhatsApp groups. So that was another channel of communication, another reason for communication during COVID times. And to get them back to the states, to the respective states, somebody is coming through railways, somebody is coming through a bus, monies have to be transferred. Communication of thoughts and decisions, and communication of currency. Monies have to be transferred to the Indian Railways, to some airlines, to get cargo. So it was a multi-channel. Everything was, it was a live hot wire everywhere. So I don't know how the newspapers played. I cannot comment because we do not get newspapers up in Ladakh here so easily. So we are dependent on the other online things. So the point that I am making is that almost all the kinds of media that exist today were used. However, even after engaging with all kinds of, new media, conventional media, the direct communication, personal communication had its own value during the times of COVID. I still remember in our place, when the first lockdowns happened, the villages which were locked down were again coincidentally certain religious, what should I say? The villages were belonging to some religious groups. So initially, again, there were problems because we are being picked out. We are being chosen for all this experiment of containment. We have been locked up in our villages. The police is surrounding our village. People are saying that these people are the people who are getting COVID. So that is the time when nothing works. No radio works, no television works, no internet works, no WhatsApp works. People have to go there, meet the people. I remember I had to go with my district magistrate and other doctors in a contained village, sit with people, talk to them. One young man had died in that village. And to build confidence and to say that no stigma should be attached to this virus. People should not be ostracized. People should not be thrown out of their homes. People should not stop meeting their relatives because of this virus. We took the initiative and went inside the house where this person has died. And that kind of risk was taken. And such interpersonal communications finally built up the, the confidence amongst people to again contribute and, collaborate with the government in defeating the disease or the virus. So anyway, I don't know, I was talking about, and due to your invitation, I could recollect so many things that were done in those days. So you people are, media educators and experts in the field, and I think more, engagement with the problems and the shortfalls of the communication channels and the communication medium, and certainly, like Professor Dhar said, the content of the communication, the mind behind the communication, that is another thing that needs to be engineered and put in the right place. So I believe such engagements will open, vistas for thought and research and creation of more knowledge, so that the next time any other disaster of this scale happens, we still don't know that COVID is really out or still coming in a new form. So will, equip us in a better way for the future. With this, I would stop, and I would, try to gain from the knowledge all the esteemed professors and guests have to share tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your views and the address. Now, I would like to introduce the media stalwart, Professor Veerbala Agarwal, as a student of her, because I have studied from Himachal Pradesh University myself. Professor Veerbala Agarwal is a well-renowned media educator in India. She is former chairperson, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, and former director, Women's Studies Center, Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla. She has founded the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication in Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla in the year 1986, and has made remarkable and outstanding contribution towards the growth and development of the department. I have been blessed and lucky enough to be her student and mentored by a stalwart like her. She is the most vibrant, cheerful, and positive personality I have ever known, and has always been a great guide and support. She is passionate, she is dedicated, and a person of her word. Now, I would request Professor Sanjeev Bhanawat-ji to introduce her. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ranjana. मेरे ख्याल से एक सबसे बड़ा परिचय तो वीरबाला जी का यही है कि उनके डिपार्टमेंट से एक ऐसी विद्यार्थी निकली है जिन्होंने आज के हमारे इस पूरे आयोजन की जिस तरह से संकल्पना परिकल्पना की है और जितने प्रभावी ढंग से ये इसका संचालन कर रही है। प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल, जहां तक मेरा उनसे व्यक्तिगत संबंध है, शायद 80 के दशक से है, जब इन्होंने हिमाचल प्रदेश में अपने मास कम्युनिकेशन डिपार्टमेंट की स्थापना की थी। प्रारंभिक दौर में मुझे 2-3 बार उनके यहाँ देखने का, उनकी अध्यापन और प्रशासनिक क्षमताओं से सीधा रूबरू होने का मुझे एक अवसर मिला। जब उनके डिस्टेंट मोड से दिल्ली में उनके सेंटर्स चलते थे, वहां भी मुझे कई बार जाने का मौका मिला, एक परीक्षक के रूप में और उनकी जो अलग अलग कमेटीज है उनके रूप में। एक हंसमुख, विनम्र, सक्रिय मीडिया शिक्षक के रूप में प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल देश भर में अपनी विशिष्ट पहचान रखती है। विश्वविद्यालय अनुदान आयोग तथा अन्य इस प्रकार की जो अन्य राष्ट्रीय एजेंसीज हैं, उनके अनेक परियोजनाओं पर, उनके इंस्पेक्शन पर आपने देश की यात्राएं की हैं। प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल ने जिस तरह से अपने डिपार्टमेंट को अपनी क्षमता के अनुरूप एक विजनरी लीडरशिप दी है, वो अपने आप में एक अनुकरणीय उदाहरण है। प्रकाशन और शोध के क्षेत्र में इनकी विशेष उपलब्धियां रही हैं। प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल की 2 पुस्तकें, मुझे लगता है क्योंकि सिलेक्शन कमेटीज में जाने का कई बार मौका मिलता है, जब भी विद्यार्थियों से बात करते हैं तो अक्सर मैंने उन पुस्तकों को उद्धृत करते हुए, कोट करते हुए सुना है कि साहब हमने प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल की हैंडबुक ऑफ जर्नलिज्म एंड पब्लिक रिलेशंस एंड एसेंशियल्स ऑफ पब्लिक प्रैक्टिकल जर्नलिज्म, इन 2 पुस्तकों की अक्सर चर्चा की जाती है। और हाल ही में, अभी कुछ वर्ष पूर्व ही, उन्होंने इसका हिंदी संस्करण भी, जो विशेषकर हैंडबुक ऑफ पब्लिक जर्नलिज्म एंड मास कम्युनिकेशन है, उसका उन्होंने प्रकाशन भी हिंदी में किया है। यूं तो अनेक पुरस्कारों से आप सम्मानित हो चुकी हैं, जिसमें मुख्य रूप से भारत निर्माण और विजयश्री पुरस्कार हैं। और अभी 2018 में मीडिया एजुकेशन समिट, जिसका एक राष्ट्रीय अधिवेशन दिल्ली में हुआ था, उसमें लाइफ टाइम अचीवमेंट अवार्ड से भी आपको वहां सम्मानित किया गया। देश दुनिया में अनेक यात्राएं करने का आपको मौका मिला। जैसे मैंने आपसे कहा कि अपने एकेडमिक असाइनमेंट्स को लेकर के देश में तो ये जाती रही, चाहे वो यूजीसी या यूनिवर्सिटीज के असाइनमेंट्स हो, लेकिन दुनिया के अनेक देशों की, लगभग 20 से अधिक देशों की आपने यात्राएं की। अमेरिका, कनाडा, अफ्रीका, यूएई, मलेशिया, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, सिंगापुर, इंडोनेशिया, स्विट्जरलैंड, इटली, ग्रीस, थाईलैंड, स्पेन, फ्रांस, नेपाल, स्कॉटलैंड, चीन, जापान, हंगरी, ने जाने कितने देशों की आपने यात्राएं की। इस प्रकार से जो अकादमिक अनुभव है आपका, उसका एक पूरा अंतर्राष्ट्रीय परिदृश्य है। 3 रिफ्रेशर कोर्स आपने ऑर्गेनाइज किए, और मुझे याद है जब हमारे यहाँ 2 विद्यार्थियों की वाइवा लेने के लिए आई हुई थी पीएचडी का, तो हमारे विभाग में भी जो एक रिफ्रेशर कोर्स था, उसको भी आपने संबोधित किया था। जापान का टोयोटो फाउंडेशन, उसकी फेलोशिप पर आपने ट्रांसलेशन के क्षेत्र में भी विशेष योगदान दिया। लगभग 30 से अधिक शोध पत्र आपके प्रकाशित हो चुके हैं, उसमें से कई शोध पत्र पुस्तकाकार रूप में भी प्रकाशित हुए हैं। 28 विद्यार्थी आपके निर्देशन में पीएचडी की उपाधि प्राप्त कर चुके हैं। देश दुनिया की अनेक राष्ट्रीय अंतर्राष्ट्रीय कॉन्फ्रेंस में न सिर्फ आपने सहभागिता की है, वरन अपने विभाग में उन्होंने आयोजन भी किया है। जिस तरह से उन्होंने देश की युवा पीढ़ी को मीडिया शिक्षण के क्षेत्र में नेतृत्व दिया है, मुझे लगता है ग्लोबल मीडिया एजुकेशन काउंसिल उन्हें आज अपने मंच पर पुरस्कृत कर गौरवान्वित महसूस कर रही है। और मैं स्वयं, चूंकि मेरा तो उनसे आत्मीय जो संबंध है बहुत पुराना रहा है, बहुत ही मैत्री भाव, और हमारी छोटी छोटी उपलब्धियों पर जिस तरह से वो प्रोत्साहन देती रही हैं, वो एक वास्तव में जो एक नेतृत्व जिसके पास में है, या एक मेंटर के रूप में उनकी विशिष्ट भूमिका रही है। मैं आज के हमारे जो चीफ गेस्ट हैं सौगात विश्वास जी, जिन्होंने बहुत विस्तार के साथ एक वो पूरे जो हमारे 2 साल का जो पूरा एक चुनौतीपूर्ण समय था, किस तरह से कोरोना काल के अंदर सरकारी मशीनरी सक्रिय हुई, किस तरह से भ्रामक सूचनाओं के दौर में हम लोग जीने लगे थे, और कैसे मीडिया कर्मियों ने उस क्राइसिस सिचुएशन के दौर में अपनी जान पर खेल करके, अपनी नौकरी की कीमत पर, जिस तरह से वो जो दौर हमने देखा उसे याद न करें तो अच्छा है, लेकिन जिस तरह से आपने उस पर चुनौतियों को एक वॉर फ्रंट के लेवल पे जिस तरह से निपटने के, आप स्वयं वरिष्ठ प्रशासनिक अधिकारी हैं, जिस तरह से ये सारा काम किया उसका बहुत ही विस्तार से रविधर जी ने जिस विस्तार से जिक्र किया, तो मैं सौगात विश्वास से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे एक औपचारिक घोषणा करें प्रोफेसर वीरबाला अग्रवाल को लाइफ टाइम अचीवमेंट अवार्ड देने की।
Congratulations, Veerbala ma'am. I would like to congratulate Veerbala ma'am. Oh, sorry, we have a power failure here. I would request the session chair and I would request our honorable chief guest to say a few words for ma'am.
I would congratulate Madam Professor Veerbala Agarwal for being honored with a lifetime contribution to media and communication education. I recollect my days as an assistant professor of mass communication, before I joined the civil services. And when I came to know about her, I was pleasantly surprised, and I recollected my days that I have heard her name a lot. So I, consulted, candidly, I am saying that I consulted my colleagues of yesteryears, and they said that we, used to consult her for various academic matters at that time, and we acknowledge her great contribution and, lifetime contribution to the field of mass media, mass communication, and the books and the knowledge that she has created and given to the students of media. Her one esteemed student spoke so nicely about her before all of us. So, madam, whatever we say is less. I mean, you have given a lifetime into this media education, and we would like that you continue to, handhold the students of mass communication, media in every way in the future. Thanks a lot.
Truly said, sir. Thank you so much for your words. Ravi Kedhar, sir, would you like to say a few words about ma'am?
Yes, definitely. It's really a matter of great delight for us to see the recognition of the distinguished services that ma'am has rendered to the media community, the community of media educators and also media persons. I recall the time when I was at Punjab Agriculture University and we used to interact quite often. Many of my colleagues, they did their PhDs under her, and ma'am has been always very dedicated. She would sit even as late as 9 o'clock in the night, 10 o'clock, collect all the students, guide them. There was no bar on the time. No, it was not something like it is 9 to 4 job or 9 to 5 job. There were no timings as far as working was concerned. So her love for the students, her being very particular that every student makes it through. No student is left out. That was something very, very amazing. And personally, I consider her my elder sister. So for me, it is really, I feel honored and delighted that she has been honored today. And the other thing is that she has written, as has been said, she's written prolifically. She's written a number of books. She's come out with so many books, and each book, as Professor Banawat was also saying, has become a Bible of journalism education. You visit any department of journalism in any university, you will find that book, and you'd ask any student, which book did you consult for your postgraduate education, even for undergraduate education? He will definitely, or she will definitely, that student will definitely mention the book written by the Handbook of Journalism, a fantastic book that she had written. And apart from that, so many other books she came out with. So, ma'am, congratulations, heartiest congratulations. It's a pleasure to see you being honored. Wish you all the best and continue, as Mr. Sogat Biswas was rightly saying, continue to handhold your juniors and the students as you have been always doing. I know that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I will request our esteemed media stalwart, Professor Veerpala Agarwalji, to kindly address the audience.
Good evening, everybody. Professor Dhar, Professor Sanjeev Bhanawat, and my dear student Ranjana Thakur, they have already spoken much about me. I don't think I am so much capable as they have said. Today, I am deeply honored and humbled by the recognition you have conferred upon me. My hearty thanks to my nominators, Professor K.G. Sureshji, President, Global Media Education Council, and Vice Chancellor Makhunlal Chaturvedi National University of Journalism and Mass Communication, Bhopal. Professor Ujjwal Kumar Chaudhary ji, Secretary, Global Media Education Council, and former Pro Vice Chancellor, Public Relations and Media, Admas University, Kolkata, and all the members of the organizing committee. It gives me immense pleasure that I am receiving this award in the galaxy of honorable members of this conclave, Shri Sogas Biswas ji, IAS First Divisional Commissioner of Ladakh Division, Professor Robert Chandler, Lipscomb University, Nashville, US, who is an international speaker on crisis communication. I tell you, it's very sad to know that his mother expired and he returned only on yesterday after her funeral. He's a so committed person. He's always, ready, whatever the work is given to him. We are really very sorry for him. Professor Pallavur Vaidyanathan, former Assistant Vice President, University of Central Florida, US, who has always been very helpful to the Indian students for their projects. Professor Ravi Kumar Dhar, Professor of Journalism, Director of Jagannath International Management School, New Delhi, who is just like my brother and very rich in communication. Mr. B.D. Sharma ji, former Director of Information and Public Relations, Himachal Pradesh Government, Shimla, who is very helpful to all the people, whosoever goes to him. Last but not the least, I sincerely thank again Professor Sanjeev Bhanawat ji, mentor of Global Media Education Council, and my dear student teacher, Dr. Ranjana Thakur, for helping me to receive this award as a mark of my achievement. I also promise to work more so that I can reach to your expectations much more. Winning this award would not have been possible without the inspiration I have received from my seniors, my colleagues, and my students, for whom I have the deepest respect and love, from which I have derived the strength to challenge myself and perform better at each stage. This award means a lot to me because it has given me recognition of my services as an educator. Now, a little bit about my journey at Shimla. In the late 1986, when I founded the Department of Mass Communication at Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla, I had to struggle a lot as I was the only teacher in the department. Resources were very scarce. Students were finding very difficult to find the material. And I was the single recruited teacher in the department at that time. I used to take all the classes. In the beginning, it was very hard to perform the entire task. But anyhow, I managed with my 6-month-old daughter. I was fortunate enough in the sense that my students and the staff was very supportive. I used to help the students in the library, explaining them how to find the reference material from various encyclopedias, European yearbooks, atlases, and many various reports, as there was hardly any book which could cover the entire syllabus. This exercise also helped me to collect the material from various reference books, commission reports, newspapers, and journals, etc. Looking at the difficulty of the students to find material for the exams, I started writing. Whatever little knowledge I had of the various papers which I was teaching, I started penning down, which I brought out in the form of textbooks. And these became very popular among the students, faculty, and media practitioners. I got very huge response. After that, no looking back in the academic field. So today's theme is crisis communication during COVID-19 pandemic, issues and challenges. Here we have already very popular academicians in the session, but I will speak a few words about the topic. Actually, crises come in a variety of ways. COVID-19 as a global event has created enormous anxiety and unease among the people. It has created havoc across the world, putting extraordinary pressure on not just public health systems, but also on crisis communications. The COVID-19 pandemic produced globally unhappiness by disrupting interactions between people, families, and businesses all around the world. Joblessness continues to be a negative consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, with far-reaching consequences that have sparked a slew of crises. With about 736 districts in 28 states and 8 union territories, and varied shades of dialects and cultures within the states, crisis communication in India becomes a complex exercise. It not only has to address 1.38 billion citizens, but it has also to chalk out customized, tailor-made crisis communication plans for every state and sections of the society, especially the poor and the marginalized. The COVID pandemic has thrown up a new challenge of communication crisis, as everyone has been compelled to switch over to the virtual world, with which everyone might not be very conversant and familiar. Every sector of society, be it all important judiciary, social education, school education, seminars, and even global meets, addressed by heads of the states, are being held virtually. With the entire world being pushed from physical to virtual world, a compulsion thrust by COVID, there is bound to be communication crisis. The crisis could be very wide-ranging as we all tread into the virtual world. The comfort level of rural populace in the handling the virtual world is less. Not to forget the connectivity issues faced in many remote and inaccessible areas. A perfect example was the manner in which people from rural areas got all the vaccine slots booked meant for tribal people residing in the district of Lahore Spiti, who could not log on the CoWIN portal to get a vaccine slot booked. There were also several examples of people managing fictitious e-passes made mandatory for several states to gain entry during restrictions. Rising COVID-19 cases for the last 2 years, along with unavoidable misinformation and disinformation, provided leaders with a plethora of complicated problems for which there are no clear solutions. Extreme compromises are becoming more common, and with them, challenging decisions about how to communicate complicated issues to various audiences. At such times, a leader's words and actions can help keep people safe, help them adjust, and cope emotionally. Business leaders must communicate with empathy. Effective communication contributes to the development of trust in organizations and their efforts to overcome challenges. Leaders and communicators should be vigilant about the game plan they use when developing crisis preparations, ensuring that it is appropriate, informative, and effective. The features of the message, such as straightforwardness, practicality, sympathy, and lucidity, as well as the source and communication channels used, all inspire trust in crisis communication. With social media being the primary medium for information consumption, clear end-to-end crisis communication with diverse target groups becomes key in dealing with such a pandemic. Online media provides an important platform that should be used in conjunction with other communication methods for two-way communication with people in general, as well as providing basic information about opportunities. Facebook is the most widely used online media platform with 14 million daily users, ensuring that all communication attempts are consistent, clear, and continuous is pivotal to crisis communication, which builds trust. With so much pessimism on the globe, leaders and communicators must take the information as certain, reassuring, and confident as possible. There are several reasons for the explosive expansion of crisis communication in recent years. Outrage is one of the main reasons why the demand for communication, crisis communication, is increasing. With so many people at home due to pandemic and job losses, the internet has become a battleground. In this age of web-based media, an online standing repair has become a must. Organizations that specialize in web-based services can't afford to have their reputation tarnished. For enterprises, they need to keep an eye on their reputation and keep moving forward despite a volatile world. Crisis planning and crisis public relations have thus become essential. Thank you very much. Thank you once again for conferring this award to me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your views with us. They were really, really interesting and enlightening. Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker for the session, Professor Robert Chandler. Professor Robert Chandler, he is PhD from University of Kansas. He is an internationally recognized expert on multiple aspects of crisis communication, management, leadership, decision-making, and human interaction in specialized contexts. He currently holds an academic appointment as a professor at Lipscomb University, where he directs the graduate and professional programs in communication. With more than 30 years of applied research into factors impacting effective communication and performance, exploring key psychological and physiological variables, he has produced 9 books and more than 175 scholarly and professional publications. His title for today is Crisis Communication During COVID-19 Pandemic, Issues, Challenges, and Lessons to Learn. Over to you, Professor Robert Chandler.
Thank you. And I'm humbled to be here. I'm honored to be here. I'm actually very delighted that I have the opportunity to be here for my colleague, Madam Professor Agarwal, receiving this recognition, which is well-deserved. And I actually see several other long-term colleagues here on this session. So this is really delightful to be here. I just want to try to talk for a few minutes on this topic and give us a sense of a call to action. My students tell me I talk too fast, so I apologize for that. I am speaking to you from Nashville, Tennessee, where it is it's 11 and a half hours behind you. So it is early morning here. But good evening to all of you where it's evening from here in Nashville. You know about me, but let me just tell you, I just want to give you a little overview on this topic. I want to talk about a few of the communication challenges that popped up, and I have 12 lessons learned, and I'm very humble about this. I'm not sure they're the most brilliant insights on the planet, but I do have a final call to action to share with you. And so let me just start with the idea of this whole pandemic that happened. In 2009, actually, Vaidi, you were my colleague at the time. I published a book called Surviving the Pandemic.
Yeah.
And in that book, I said that one of the most important things, in addition to healthcare and medicine, to ensure the survival of our society and economy, is that we need to be very effective crisis communication. My book did not sell particularly well. In fact, one reviewer wrote that my book was in the wrong century, that this was the 21st century and there would be never again a pandemic. I don't take any pleasure in the fact that COVID-19 sort of proved my thesis right. It took an extra almost a decade before that, a little over a decade before that thesis was proven. But one of the things the pandemic did was it woke us up again to some long known truths, and it forced us to rediscover some of those truths. We began to go back to what I had called for years ago, that we need to understand the psychology, the behavioral science, that quite literally, it's more complicated than most people thought. All they thought was we just have to issue releases, give information. All we need is a vaccine. All we need is to tell people how to social distance, and people will just follow along. Well, obviously, we learned it was not that simple, and so I think that caught a lot of people off guard, and it made people like myself a bit of a Cassandra. And of course, in classical Greek mythology, Cassandra was cursed with the idea of foreknowledge of future catastrophe, of which no one would believe. And I think one of the things that the COVID-19 did as a global pandemic is that it really reminded us once again of the importance of strategic planning, the importance of, oops, sorry, my cursor moved my thing, the importance of strategic planning, and the importance of an interaction effect of how we interact and we manage pandemic. It's just not a simple thing. And for too many people, everything in the pandemic was sort of learned by trial and error. It didn't have to be that way, but that's what it turned out to be. What I would suggest, in fact, my keynote, the point of it, the thesis of what I want to give you is that it's not that we should have been surprised. In fact, we should not have been surprised at what happened, but we failed to take the precautions and learn the lessons that already existed when the pandemic happened. And I do not believe the question is if there's another pandemic. There will be. I don't know if it's going to be influenza or some new variant or mutation of COVID or even something else that's out there. Viruses and disease has been endemic to this planet since before there were humans and ever since there have been humans. And so I guess the message here is it's not if there'll be another pandemic, it's just a question of when. And will we be better prepared next time for that? I still believe the thesis that I argued in 2009, that yes, in addition to healthcare and surge capacity and vaccines and mitigation, all of those things are very important. I cannot get away from the fact that effective communication in a crisis like that is still among the most important aspects of how that would be involved in terms of managing the crisis. So let me just talk about one of the challenges. As I looked at all of the different communication, and I've had a chance to look at communication both in the US and Europe, in various parts of Asia, particularly Thailand, doing some studies with Dr. Gavin McGregor-Skinner to look at COVID communication in Africa. To pull some things together, let me offer you one observation of a challenge that emerged. And that is, I think, a framing challenge. And so if you're a communication scholar here, I know I'm talking very basics. If you're not, if you're a professional or you work in the government sector, this might be a little bit of a different perspective. But one of the things about communication is when you just give information, it never is just information. It always occurs in a frame or a box or a parameters or scaffolding around it. One of the things that I think we learned in COVID is there were 3 different framing models that were widely used across the globe. And I think they were used in sequence, and each one proved to be ineffective and caused us to move to the subsequent one. And so the 3 framing models were quite simply, the very first was individual focus. In the early days of the pandemic, we were talking about individual people's risk. In fact, one of the widely debated things is that the average risk was slightly less than 1% chance of everyone who got infected, and eventually it became closer to 2% in the early phases of COVID, a less than 2% or less than 1% chance of dying. And that is statistically accurate. It is medically accurate. What we discovered, though, so many of the population heard that and said, oh, there's no chance of me dying because 98% of people survive. In fact, that quote got used frequently with people who rejected mitigation, who rejected masks, who rejected social distancing. In many cultures around the world, including mine here in the US, they rejected the vaccine because they said 98% of people die. And so just taking information and how you frame it, the first effort to do individual focused framing, in fact, did not work. It did not succeed. In fact, one of the things that happened was in many parts of the world, people compared it to influenza. Well, that's just barely more than the typical influenza season. So why should we all worry? Why do we have to close businesses? Why do we have to have lockdowns? One of the things was also and by the way, statistically valid information that created a communication problem included the fact that in the first outbreak, the first surge of COVID, it tended to be the victims of it tended to be immunocompromised or the elderly. Now, this is very sad, but many people said, I'm not immunocompromised, I'm not old, this disease doesn't affect me. We know later that there were many ways of transmitting the disease. You could still have serious hospitalization, long-term, long-haul COVID. There were many things that it didn't occur to people because of the framing of it. And so I think communicators began to adjust their focus after that. And then the next framing that became very prevalent in the communication that I monitored around the globe was interpersonal focus framing. Now, interpersonal framing is different than individual. It began to talk about, well, you should do the measures or not, you should isolate, you should quarantine, you should social distance because you probably have vulnerable people. You've got parents who live with you. You've got children. You've got people who are immunocompromised. So you don't do this because you're at risk, because no one believed they were. People around the globe believed they were somehow, this didn't bother them. And that worked a little better. Certain people began to say, yeah, because of children, because I have elderly parents, because I take care of my in-laws, it still created, it perpetuated the very false notion that this was a disease only of the extremely aged or people who were already immunocompromised. And by the way, one of the sad things that we learned in doing surveys is that when people heard immunocompromised, the most common answer we got to surveys was likely to die anyway. That's wrong. That is not a scientifically valid statement. It was an attitude and opinion that was widely held. Well, if you've got heart disease or you've had a lung transplant, you were going to die anyway, so it shouldn't be counted in this. And so that's very frustrating. And so I think communicators began to try to find a way to reframe it differently. And at the third and the final level of framing that emerged in COVID is what I'm just going to describe as what I call systems level. And systems level framing seemed to be one of the most effective ways to communicate risk. People did not respond to the individual one. There's 2% of you are going to die. That kind of didn't work. Do it because your parents, your elderly neighbors, your children might get sick and 2% of them might die. That helped a little better. But finally, the idea that if you can just not fill up the hospitals, because once you fill up the hospitals with COVID patients, people who need heart surgery or liver surgery or dialysis can't get in for treatment. And now people who really don't even have COVID are being hurt. Plus the fact you're putting providers at risk, you're taxing the system, you're occupying hospital beds that car accident victims need to be in. And in fact, some of the numbers that with COVID, the number of people who were denied hospital beds was nearly 20 times higher than non-COVID periods. And for many of us, hospitalization rates and overcapacity are not catchy phrases, but it did seem to resonate better. And even with the flatten the curve rhetoric worked better in communication. And I don't think it was complete. Here's my takeaway from this. Before COVID broke out, nobody had really, in the communication sector, really stopped to say, if we just give them science information, they'll just understand it and believe it. And it turns out they don't. They don't understand probabilistic risks. The typical population doesn't see and translate these things that a research scientist does or a medical statistician does. We have to give serious thought to something as simple as how we take honest, and I'm not even saying inaccurate information. I'll get to that in a minute. We take accurate information and how we communicate that is pivotal. And that's sort of my message that's been for more than a decade now, that when we talk about these ideas. So let me just give you 12 quick lessons learned. I'm not going to talk very long here, but I just want to give you 12 lessons learned from COVID. Number one, which comes from the framing issue, is communicating complex information is not as simple as so many people think. According to cognitive science and behavioral science, most people want to know if there's a problem and they want a solution to the problem. Now, you and I can say COVID wasn't that easy. It was complicated. It was a moving target. It was changing. That's all true. I'm just telling you the reality is of the typical worker out there who's being told this. Do I mask? Do I not mask? Do I wash my hands? Does that make a difference? And then when the information is contradictory or changes, they get confused and they reject all of it. You know, this is real simple. In the early days of COVID, you would think it'd be really simple for an airborne respiratory virus. The notion of putting cloth or a filter over your mouth would make sense. Yet the idea of wearing masks in many parts of the globe became controversial in itself. Of what seems to be now, why is because the scientific community gave you statistical information about masks are not 100% effective. They won't stop you from getting COVID. It doesn't change the reality that they were still a good mitigation device. But when people heard this, they said, see, and I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to social distance. And later on, you know, the very first information was you shouldn't wear a mask and you should get it. That's a reality of changing science during a pandemic. Unfortunately, it creates confusion. It challenges the trustworthiness of information. And so we need to treat communication, this kind of crisis communication, with the complexity that it needs. It doesn't change the fact that people want actionable solutions and clear behavioral guidelines. If I were to prepare us and recommend things for the next pandemic, is that we need to come up with a series of message maps for very specific behavioral guidelines and try as much as possible to make them as applicable to as many different types of transmission vectors and get those messages out. There was one article that was published that said during the early days of the pandemic, most people felt like they were in Super Mario World. I don't know if any of you play video games, but you finally arrive at the castle and you find out that the princess you were looking for is in a different castle. I find that kind of a humorous approach to it, that we were told if we just stayed 3 meters apart, we would not get the disease. That didn't pan out. If we just wash our hands, use hand sanitizer. So many of the early things turned out not to be the solution to the problem. And I'm not questioning the science, the medicine. I understand that's evolving as we learn more. I want you to see this from the person receiving the communication. They conclude that you don't know what you're talking about because you had to change things. We need to find the way to speak the same language consistently and more regularly. I do think we need to speak in common terms. Now, this varies around the world. In my country, in the US, among literate adults, the mean is about 10th grade reading level. And in fact, large segments of our population who are literate, I'm not even talking about illiterate, we have illiterate people in the US as well, read at the 7th to 8th grade level. We found when we did an analysis of the grade level language in most pandemic communication that it was written above the 12th grade reading level. I can just tell you as a college professor that if I write things as a PhD for my college students, they don't understand 80% of what I say. So much of our information was written by scientists and who are smarter than me, but we didn't take the time to express them in words that were accessible. We found that in our surveys of people, do you understand the information you were given? We found up to 70% of random respondents would say, I have no idea what this means. I don't understand it. That's a problem with crisis communication in a pandemic that we have got to address. I suggest we begin to use tools like the Fleischmann-Kincaid readability scale. We use grade level scales in whatever language you're, I haven't dealt with multiple languages. And so all of this is there. Public, business, and healthcare information must be written in ways that is accessible to the widest audiences, and we can't just be talking to ourselves. We cannot write things, we must write them in ways that are comprehensible and actionable by our target audiences. The fourth of the 12 lessons learned is culture. I am delighted to be talking to you. I've had a chance to visit some of my colleagues there in India on several occasions and work with them. I have been advising a university in India during the pandemic. I'm very keen to the idea of international and global cultural differences, or even the cultural differences within India or the cultural differences across the US. But I'm talking about something even more specific: communities, rural, the highly educated to the uneducated, people in different careers, the impact and power of religion and worldviews on whether disease is a curse and it's something that comes to you because the divine gods will it, or whether it's all biological or not. We have got to really begin to get sensitive that when we talk about a pandemic, we're talking about an issue that people feel passionate about. They may feel, in fact, in my country, there's a very potent movement of people that rejected vaccines and claimed religion. God would protect them. They didn't need a vaccine. We did a terrible job trying to incorporate local communities, local beliefs, local philosophies. And I think we've got to think about the next pandemic to truly come at this, not top down, we know better than you, give up your superstitions, which I think is the wrong way to do it. I think we've got to find a way to talk the language and talk the culture and the assumptions. And I don't even get me started on politics. Much of the resistance to crisis communication on COVID around the globe has been political. That is especially true in my country. There are people who reject every bit of the crisis communication because they don't see it as aligning with their political views, and we have got to take that into account. I don't think we can get people to change their religion, change their politics, change their belief about whether life is random or there's karma. Yes, I think those are out there. We have got to find a better way to connect and communicate across those areas. One of our, at the introduction, when the issues were framed for this session, and I appreciated your introduction, the word of misinformation, or we sometimes use the word misinfodemic. Yes, it wasn't just a matter that we had to get accurate information out there. We need to understand better as crisis communicators during a pandemic that we're not the only voice. They have others whispering in their ears, and you add social media, traditional media, and we need to be more self-critical that they're listening to people telling them, don't believe this nonsense. Don't trust the scientists, trust my quack remedy or something, take horse dewormer instead of the vaccine. You and I might rationally, and I'm a professor, so I'm probably as guilty of anybody who just kind of dismisses that. Wow, you must be really dumb to think taking a horse dewormer is better than the vaccine. I get that, and we can privately have those conversations. The point is, as crisis communicators, we have got to step back and understand that they are getting lots of people pulling them in different directions. And that out there in the marketplace of ideas, there's other people selling them snake oil rather than genuine medicine. And by the way, I'm not even here being biased that Western medicine is the only way to do this. I understand there are traditional medicine, homeopathic. In fact, we had that in a couple of the Asian countries we worked in, of people that wanted to cling. We need to find a way to integrate what we're doing with what we find in our audience, and we've got to cut through that noise and get there. The other thing I think we learned, the sixth lesson we learned in the pandemic, was that a lot of our messaging did not come across as very empathetic. We didn't get people's trust. We talked to them in a sense, almost like we're talking to children at times, just telling you must do this. You need to stand 6 feet apart, 3 meters. You must wash your hands while you sing a song. I think we've got to reframe things. I think the most effective type of communication comes with relationship communication. We're trying to help you. We've got to come across as we're not, one of the big arguments is mandates. You mandated that I survive this pandemic. That is absurd. I think we've got to come across as we want to help you survive it. We're not mandating that you must survive it. And I think we need to communicate care and concern as well as behavioral guidance. The seventh lesson learned is we must partner with the target audiences and the communities we're trying to reach. We must collaborate with them. We must find a way to sit beside them, to talk with them side by side or across the table, and not broadcast large directives. And I think that probably speaks for itself. And I really am calling for a change in our whole tone. I mentioned message maps a minute ago. You probably can't see my graphic here. It's blurry. One of the things that I have worked on the last 30 years is the importance of knowing in advance what your messaging will be for each kind of point that you want to accomplish, and you should have a map for them. That doesn't mean you follow them. You can't adjust them. I think one of the things during the pandemic that was exposed is that we were all over the place. We were saying one thing one day, we didn't follow it up. We weren't consistent on all forms and channels. And we weren't prepared. We didn't prepare people that this might change. We might change the guidance on masks. We might change the guidance. For those of us who were fully vaccinated after 2, and then later they said, well, you might need a booster. There were many places where people began to rebel against that. There were other people that are still waiting for their first vaccination. And so we need a better map, a roadmap, a message map, a navigational chart for communication. And I say this as a communication scholar and professional and professor. Communication was too often thought to be just announcing information and the strategy behind communication, the actual crafting of the messages. You're talking about human psychology, talking about persuasion and rhetorical messages was not given sufficient attention. We need to map things out. The 9th lesson learned is I don't think we understood our audience. This goes with a couple of the other lessons learned that we didn't really try to understand them. One of the great phrases that I wrote down is that we had populations out there that weren't hard to reach. They were just hardly reached. We overlooked them. We didn't speak to some communities. We did not make an authentic attempt to talk in their language and to adjust our message for them. I do think that that's something that we're going to have to go back and look at. We need a complete and accurate understanding of how this pandemic was playing out in different communities, how it was playing out with different occupations, different families, people caregiving. I don't even think we've begun to sort of post facto analyze the changes on lifestyle, on family lifestyles, working, mothers who left the workforce, certain occupations that are now losing workers involved with them. I think we've got to spend more time on audience analysis and doing it. Okay, I got to have at least one stereotypical professor comment. I think that we've got to ground everything we do in the best theory, research, and best practices. I think too much of it was simply just assumed to be that way. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. I don't think we paid attention to the scholarship and the research as we communicated. I think governments failed in that. I think businesses failed in that. I think schools did. I know health communication applications did not look at the communication literature. I'm going to say this as a communication professor and scholar. We have got to do a better job of books like the one I wrote in 2009 that was ignored. We've got to do a better job of sounding the alarm and going out and teaching it. In fact, I think some of us in the academy need to leave the academy for a while and go to work in the public sector, go to work in the health comm sector, and actually bring what we know about communication to them. The 11th lesson we learned is that we can't communicate in one way. Boy, did we learn that lesson powerfully. Multiple channels, multiple pathways. The idea of having a radio press release to a community is gone. The idea of just giving it to the news media to distribute it's gone. In a social media, new media, a multimedia digital age, we have got to get more creative with getting health information out there. In fact, some of the research we did that look at what percentage of our communication efforts for crisis communication in the pandemic was very heavy to traditional media, less so, but still significant on social and new media. We did not use opinion leaders, and we certainly did not use known and trusted healthcare providers to contact people the way we should have. And I think we've got to rethink that. The other one was just about richness of it. One of the things that we know in communication is that the richest channels are the most impactful. So my example being, we didn't use trusted and known healthcare providers when we should have, because we know that physical one-on-one, personal contacts, personal phone calls, personal Zooms are the richest channel to get the most behavioral change. And having a poster in a bus station, wash your hands and social distance, is the least connecting motivational channel. We've got to get to richer channels away from it. Number 12, there's so many good books out there. I recommend Stephen Taylor's book, The Psychology of Pandemics. People were stressed, they were scared, they were anxious, they were uncertain, the anxiety levels were high. We've got to begin to understand that in moments of a pandemic, people are frightened, they're using coping mechanisms. We cannot communicate with them as if they're cold, rational machines. We have got to begin to understand the motivations and the psychology of audiences in their life. They're worried about their children. They're worried about their family. They have family members who are sick. They're trying to care give. There's so much. They lost their job. They're financially impacted. We have got to do a better job of adjusting our communication to those levels and audience. And so my call in this keynote is that we need to think about the crisis communication more so than just we need to communicate because there is a crisis. I want to turn that around. I want us to spend more time thinking about communicating in a time of crisis. And we have got to make adjustments in how we do it and what we do it. And it's not just a simple matter of we need more information or better information or accurate information. We just have to stop that idea that everything is normal. We have to now think about, how do I talk to someone who's in crisis? How do I speak to someone when they've lost their job, their family members are sick, or maybe they've lost a loved one? And we have to kind of work that together. I think that the biggest challenge for us is the same lesson I argued in my 2009 book when people dismissed it and said, Bob, there's never going to be another pandemic. That was in the last century. I think it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. And I think unless we learn these lessons and take them into account, and we begin to recognize that we need to communicate to people who are in the time of a crisis and adjust ourselves for doing it, then we won't be prepared for crisis communication in the next pandemic. I know that our session time is at an end. I can ramble all day as a professor, and if there's a conversation before we close, that's fine. But that's my call to you as a colleague, and I offer it very humbly that I think we need to go back and I don't have any brilliant insights that haven't been argued by others, but that we need to be prepared for the next one, or at least better prepared than we were for the COVID-19 global pandemic, which isn't over yet in terms of doing it. And I thank you for the time for being here. And if anybody wants to contact me, feel free to email me. I'm on WhatsApp. I don't guess anybody actually makes long distance international phone calls anymore, but you can Skype me or contact me in other more efficient ways. But yeah, so that's sort of, let me return back over to it in terms of doing it. Thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot for your enlightening words in this session. The session is really full of knowledge and information for all of us. And in fact, we are really sorry for your loss. We condole the loss of your mother, but you are a man of your word and you made it to the session. Thank you so much, sir. We are really honored. Now, I would like to introduce our special speaker, Professor Pallavur Vaidyanathanji, former Assistant Vice President, University of Central Florida, US. Professor Pallavur N. Vaidyanathan, also known as Professor Vedi, hails from Chennai. After schooling in Chennai and with degrees in physics, mechanical engineering, and manufacturing engineering, he went to the US for higher education. He obtained degrees in business administration and material science and engineering, and worked in industry for about 15 years, moving technology from the laboratories to the marketplace. Then he moved to the higher education system in the US and has worked in the US universities for over 30 years. His main work had been in managing research projects and assisting faculty members obtain research funding and managing the projects. The projects included technologies across several disciplines such as science, engineering, medical, optical, and digital technologies. He has developed joint research and educational programs between educational institutions and research organizations in India and the US. He also led a team of 15 US educators to India under the Fulbright Has program for a month-long immersive experience. So welcome, Vedi sir, and over to you, Professor Vedi.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. At the outset, I want to congratulate Professor Veerbala Agarwal on this great award. She has become a friend and a colleague for the few years I have known her, and her contributions are immense. And this is a very fitting tribute to all her contributions. And my talk today is going to be on issues related to higher education. The pandemic has definitely affected every area of education, and everybody is familiar with a lot of other things. I want to focus on the higher education, where I've spent more than 3 decades. I will talk about the undergraduate education, the graduate education, the research, and how each of these things was affected, and how the academics have adjusted a little bit and also have struggled through some of these issues, which are really very big. Let me start with undergraduate education. First of all, as Professor Chandler pointed out, the #1 best part of communication is face-to-face. So when you do not have classroom interactions, when everything is on Zoom, and students are sitting in their own comfort homes or wherever they are, the interactions with the faculty is very limited. And as a professor and a teacher, when you look at the face of your students, you know how fast they are understanding, how they are not understanding, and you're able to adjust to all those things. All those things were completely lost. And the interaction between the faculty and the students was also lost. And the interaction between students and students, raising some issues which could improve some of the learning situations, that were all lost. So this was one of the biggest losses in the undergraduate education. And when it comes to hands-on laboratory training, there are tremendous challenges. We had to adjust in such a way that we could have only a few people in the laboratories at times, and everything had to be handled very carefully. In some cases, we were not able to run the overall laboratories properly at all. So overall, I would say in the undergraduate education, the learning outcomes were tremendously negatively impacted. And I do not know what these people will face when they go on for higher education or continue their courses even into their higher level of undergraduate education. We really do not know what the implications would be. And for the faculty members, it has been a great challenge because most of them are used to teaching face-to-face, talking to students all the time, having help sessions, and dealing with them one-on-one. All that was lost. Therefore, there was a crisis for them in terms of the communications. So I go back to Professor Chandler. Not only there was communication problem between the faculty and the students, there was also faculty-faculty interactions that were all reduced because there was no faculty-faculty interactions as people were forbidden from coming into universities. Now, moving on to graduate education. Again, the face-to-face interactions were gone. And in graduate education, there is more student interactions, especially in the laboratories and when they're sitting together and talking. This is how research advances. And there are new concepts formed. And everybody thinks that the faculty members come up with all these concepts. But the reality is the faculty members guide the students, especially at the PhD level. It is a continuous interactive learning process that goes on and on and on and on, in which we put students together. One student presents, the other people critique. That way they also learn. All those interactions are very limited. And the Zoom interactions are not the same as sitting in a classroom or going to a laboratory, sitting across from your colleagues, sitting with students and discussing. This is a very major loss in graduate education. And I'm sure the students are feeling it and the faculty members are also feeling it. Now, moving on to research per se. Normally in the STEM disciplines, that is the science, technology, education, and medicine disciplines, most of the experiments and lab experience are hands-on. And when you go through these experiences, you go through tremendous discussions. These discussions were completely absent because even if they would come to their labs for some experiments and things like that, we had to keep the labs with limited students only. And so the interaction between students and the faculty became very, very, very limited. And research advancement at best was extremely difficult because research always builds on the previous work, on previous students' work, previous faculty members' work, previous researchers' work, and these are generally done mostly by discussions, and they were completely absent. And one other major aspect of doing research is presenting them in seminars, in going to conferences where they interact with other scientists, other people, where there will be more and more interactions which will lead to newer ideas, which will move on and move the research further and further. All these were lost during the pandemic. So I'll go back to Chandler to say, we have to devise methods to actually develop these communication processes at difficult times. And there was one other aspect. The students themselves, some of them faced great difficulties. Some of them were immunocompromised. Some of them had family members, loss of family members. Some of them had hospitalizations themselves or family members hospitalized. That is another part of special crisis that came in now. This would happen even in the normal time, but it will be few and far between. So there may be 1 or 2 students in a class of 50 who might go through this problem, so we might be able to deal with it. But now the numbers were huge. For the people in India, the total number of deaths in the US has been so far 800,000. Per day at the peak, 4,000 to 5,000 people were dying. And this was a mixed population. They were not older, just older people, younger people, kids dying all the time. And the hospitals were overwhelmed. And the health communicators were overwhelmed just dealing with them. So they could not communicate things properly. Therefore, there was crisis all around. So my advice to the communication experts is, you got to look at these things, and this gives you research opportunities to find out what are the best methods to communicate with students, undergraduate students, graduate students, to researchers at different points in time. And there is one other major problem that went on in the universities. The administrators faced a specific problem because they had to completely revamp their entire style of running the university or the system of higher education. Most of the communications were through interactive means, through Zoom and other means. Therefore, the technology upgrades had to be done. The next major technology upgrade that was done in many universities was to improve the filtration systems and things like that, so that when the students do come back and sit in classrooms, the transmission of virus is limited. So this was a very challenging time. The difficulty was faced by students, faculty, and administration, and there are overall losses on the learning outcomes. And I do not know whether we can actually measure all these things, but this also gives a tremendous opportunity for researchers to go through. And as Professor Chandler pointed out, some of these communication experts should go into these things. And at universities themselves, which have communications departments, they should interact with the faculty and the students at various departments and starting processes so that the students understand what communication should be, so that we can learn from them and adjust our communications means with the help of the experts in the communications field. And this could also lead to some systematic research in these areas, which might help us to be better when and if and when the next crisis comes, which I'm sure, whether it is due to virus or some other means, crisis will come, and therefore we have to be ready for those things, and the communication experts have an opportunity to learn and actually contribute. With that, I would like to conclude my comments and thanking once again for the opportunity and also congratulating Professor Veerbala Agarwal on her great award. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your views. Now, I would like to request our esteemed corporate speaker, Mr. B.D. Sharma, former Director of Information and Public Relations, Himachal Pradesh Government, Shimla. So his introduction goes as, he has worked as press secretary with 3 chief ministers of different political parties for 12 years. He has been the founder chairman of Public Relations Society of India, Shimla chapter, and remained for 10 years as such. He has a vast experience of 35 years in the field of government communication, 35 years in the public relations department. He also remained executive member of the Indian Media Center for 5 years. He has been contributing to social media on burning issues from time to time and also to some newspapers. He is a visiting faculty to Shimla-based universities besides Himachal Pradesh Institute of Public Administration on the topics related to journalism and mass communication. Welcome, sir. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to everyone and good morning to those who are from US. At the very outset, I would like to thank GECE for making me a part of this webinar. Amongst the luminaries and academia, whose contribution in the field need no emphasis. Thank you, Veerbala Agarwal ji, for introducing me to this GECE. And I also congratulate you on achieving the Life Achievement Award from this international forum. My thanks is also to Ranjana Thakur ji, who has been giving me tinkle from time to time about this webinar. Friends, speaker previous to me has spoken much on crisis communication during COVID-19 issues and challenges. I think there is not much for me to speak, but as a corporate speaker, I would like to say few words. Crisis communication is incomplete unless we know the crisis. Crisis, I will not go in the detail of the crisis, but coming to straight the present crisis of COVID-19, it was an unexpected, sudden, and unusual crisis, which people says was about 100 years back, perhaps in 1980 or 1918, 1918 or 1919. There was an uncertainty, stress everywhere, and every activities have come to a standstill. The need was to instill a confidence amongst the people and also hope from of life. As we know that crisis communication needs crisis management also. Crisis management is a very crucial work. For that we need a team. Communicator is an integral part of this team who play vital role in combating such a situation in crisis. Coming to COVID-19 straight, leaving all other things aside, as previous speaker have also said, that it was a havoc. It was created a stress among the people, and there was a quite disruption. The issue was how to save the human lives, how to save the dwindling economy, how to ensure food and shelter who have become homeless, and also to build a confidence and hope amongst the people. Referring to India, we came to know about this crisis when our Prime Minister make a national broadcast, perhaps on March 22nd, 2020, apprising the people of the country about this pandemic. And there was a despair, fear everywhere, and people were not in a position what to do, because there have been curfew, lockdown, and industries closed their productions, employed became unemployed, and so many issues. And laborers and workers, when industries were closed, started to migrate their native homes. Here, then it was a problem how to tackle this situation. Though government made various efforts, but the main role was of that communicator. As every activity had to stand still, the question was how to instill a confidence and hope amongst the people. The Press Information Bureau at the center and Public Relations Department in the states, who are government communicators, were in a very peculiar situation, because situation was very tense. They were in a fix how to reach the masses. What they did, they make best use of the media available, including social media. The first broadcast, as I have said, was made by the Prime Minister about the danger of this pandemic, and also what to do and what not to do. Thereafter, the second transmission, which was organized by the PIB, was about myth and truth about the COVID-19. This transmission received a lot of queries, just how to disinfect the food, how to use the masks, how to deal with the person with disability, because it was said that we have to maintain a social distancing. The challenges, the government organizes talks, the PIB department and State Department organize various talks of experts, doctors, apprising government, apprising the public what to do and what not to do. And also various talks how to manage the stress. Then stress, and after that, what the department did, it advised the people what to do, the migrant laborers, how to not to move, because there were rumors, fake news about the COVID, and it was a great challenge for the department or PIB to combat the situation. To counter this rumors and fake news, the department set up a fact check unit in the PIB. Then there were various measures taken to apprise the people about the COVID behavior, COVID protocol, and which helped a lot to instill a confidence amongst the people. I will not like to speak much, as much already have been said on this vital issues. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your views. Now, I would request our session chair, Professor Ravi K. Dhar, to please give us the concluding remarks for the session. Over to you, Professor Ravi K. Dhar. You are muted, sir.
Just a minute.
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. First of all, I must say it's been a pleasure listening to all the different perspectives presented by each of the distinguished speakers, and also by our Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. Govt Biswas. And I will begin with him because he opened with his remarks. And the remarks were very interesting because Ladakh, as I know, because I belong to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and many of my friends come from Ladakh, having studied in Sainik School, Nagrota. So I can visualize the toughness of the circumstances that you have in a place like Ladakh. And he recounted how difficult it was to reach out information, as our good friend, senior and very respected member, Mr. B.D. Sharma, was also referring to, because the challenge was of reaching out information, diffusing fake information, and helping people to come up with solutions and to abide by the guidelines issued by the government. And particularly in a place like Ladakh, where even the internet services may not be easily available. So he mentioned also the non-availability of newspapers in Ladakh, which might sound very strange to people in the more fortunate parts of the country, but those are the stark realities of a place like Ladakh. So it was what I liked the most was about the initiative of Ladakh Connect that he mentioned, and how it helped in overcoming the issues of the human issues involved in the resolution of this conflict pertaining this pandemic, not the conflict, the health tragedy which was precipitated by the COVID. Then Dr. Veerpala Agarwal, of course, for whom this program, which was the star attraction of this session, because she was conferred today. She also made a wonderful presentation on how the challenges, she highlighted the challenges faced by the government, the health agencies, and the people in coming to grips with the pandemic. And she highlighted the extensive use of new media during the pandemic and how online media is here to stay as the mainstream media for many activities. This is the feeling that most, because we've been organizing conferences on similar issues where we had corporate speakers also speaking, and the CEO of Indian Express, he also expressed similar views that new media is not a phenomenon which is passing or temporary or transitional. It is here to stay. Of course, I would again now go back to Professor Palavur Vaidyanathan's remarks at the same time, because what he said was equally pertinent, that in the case of higher education, and I come from higher education sector, the sudden shift from the interpersonal communication situation of the classroom to the online platforms like Zoom, that definitely took away much of the learning environment that is required for a student to learn. What happened there was just dissemination of information, and because there was no human touch involved, there was no interactional element involved, with be it among the students and the faculty and the students or among the teachers themselves, it led to a kind of a dumbing down of the process. And I think the times to come will tell the kind of damage that online education, this kind of education, has done to these students who have passed out of the universities. And I can say from my personal experience, many of these students who have got 100% marks, 99% marks, they don't know this, even the ABC of the subject, and yet they have made it to the top ranks. So these are some issues which are going to be which are going to bother us for a long time to come, not just today. Even when the pandemic is over, these will continue to haunt us. Then coming to Professor Robert Chandler's presentation, it was very comprehensive, and I liked the way he presented the whole issue in the three frames, the framing of the crisis that he did. And surprisingly enough, he should have come out with a book in anticipation, seemingly a kind of a prophetic anticipation of the fact that a pandemic was around the corner. This is something very surprising, but then it was there, and the way he laid bare the three frames, the individual, the interpersonal, and the systemic, very pertinent, and they showed how the response mechanisms worked out to the pandemic, the initial phase, the middle phase, and then when people realized that there were systemic issues involved and systemic failures also began to happen. And the most important thing that I liked about his presentation was the lessons, because ultimately things don't happen once. What has happened once can recur. And as he was saying, that the pandemic there has been a pandemic, and Professor Palavur Vaidyanathan also referred to it, and he's a scientist, and he also referred to the same thing, that what has happened today it's not necessary that it will be a passing event. There could be such crises in the times to come yet again. So unless we learn, you see, the ultimate thing is that the basic purpose of all experiences is that we should have a learning outcome out of each experience. Ultimately, like we say, that life is the best school master. So unless you learn from your experiences, then you are not a wise person, you are not a wise community, you're not a wise nation. And in this context, I found his lessons that he gave, 12 lessons he listed. These are too many. I'll not mention each of them because it will take a long time. But what was very important was that how we need to be very structured in our responses. The one thing that I found when we responded to COVID-19 in the initial phase, and which created the tragedy of migrant labor, making a beeline, some of them walking thousands and thousands of kilometers across the length and breadth of the country to reach their villages, to reach their homes. The reason was that there was a knee-jerk reaction. And it happens, but I don't blame anyone, because when there is a situation of this kind, which has not been experienced earlier, it is but natural that people will get panic-stricken. And when a person is panic-stricken, then the response he or she will give will always be a knee-jerk. It will be a reaction, not a response. And reactions are always knee-jerk. And therefore, in this context, I feel that the structuring that he calls for of the communication messaging, how communication messaging should happen, it should not be, and he invoked the rich media and the lean media. I like that also very much about it, about this, that when you are passing on messages, it should not be in the militaristic way or bureaucratic way where you ask people to comply, because people are not your subordinates. People are human beings. They are not robots. They are not automatons. So you need to understand the people who have to comply with the guidelines. You need to understand their psychology, their cultural backgrounds, and keeping that in mind, pass on the messages and dilute the language of the messages. Because the message that is being passed on is a scientific message, and scientific information tends to get bogged down with scientific jargon. So cut aside the jargon, make it simple as a child can understand, something which I think we need to learn from our mystic masters like Ramakrishna Paramahansa. When he would speak, they would put those things, or even in the Bible, in the parables that are given. So using the language of the child, using the language of the person who is a non-specialist, a generalist. So these, I like that, and I've already referred to Professor Palavur Vaidyanathan's comments. And I do understand that science and technology, the education in science and technology, I think that has suffered the most, because these are things where you have to have experimentation, you have to be in the labs. And unless you have ever carried out an experiment, I don't think you have learned anything. It's not book reading, it is not theory, mere theory. And Mr. B.D. Sharma, as he has been on the other side, he comes from the public relations background. He comes from that background where government information has to be passed on to the public. So that he has rightly mentioned that the challenges that were there before the government in disseminating information, and that is exactly what we have been discussing all through. My submission has been that I fully agree that scientific information needs to be passed on, but I have a different point of view on all this. My point of view is that when it comes to tackling of such pandemics and natural calamities like these, I think there's a basic difference of approach between the West and the East. The West has relied morely, of course, Professor Chandler referred to it when he made a passing reference to alternative medicines. Now, alternative medical therapies and medical procedures, they tend to be of a different kind from the allopathic medical procedures. The basic difference, as I see, between Ayurveda that has emerged in India and yoga in India and allopathy in the West is that Ayurveda believes in empowering the human body. Ayurveda and yoga lay emphasis on empowering the body to such an extent that it does not have to run for cover when such a calamity emerges, and which brings on greater calamities in terms of economic hardships, in terms of economic destruction of the economies, and human tragedies like labor moving away from cities and going back to villages, going without food and water on the way because they did not know if they don't get jobs, if the factories are locked out, then how are they going to survive in the cities? So Ayurveda has always emphasized that empower the body to such an extent. And I'm saying this on the strength of personal experiences in my family, as far as I'm concerned, and my son, elder son, who lives in Switzerland and is a software engineer. I have myself gone through the Ayurvedic system, and I have seen the kind of recharging that happens in the body. When you recharge the body, then you don't need external stimuli in the form of medication, in the form of vaccination. You don't have to run for cover. But the Ayurvedic system is a long process. Short-term remedies, you will have to go over there. Because if you look at the charts of the people who died during the pandemic, yes, it did cut across age barriers. It was not restricted only to the old people. Young people also died. But then if you look at the statistics which is presented on worldometers.com, you will find that it affected the developed countries more than it did in the developing countries. What was the reason that countries which were developed, which had all the infrastructure, which had all the resources, which should have been the most competent and capable economies to handle such a crisis, failed on the front as compared to poor countries in Asia? And if you look at the waves, the number of waves that have hit Europe and America, there are 5 to 6 waves. In India, just 3 waves. And the third wave was more of a kind of what I would say, immunity builders. The Omicron built a kind of a natural immunity in individuals compared to the first Delta wave and the first wave. The basic reason was obesity and overweight. If you look at that, 70% of populations in America and Europe, these are exploitative structures. These are exploitative systems. Yes, exploitative systems came under attack during COVID-19. You look at the villages in India, the effect was felt more in cities than it was felt in the villages. Why? Because people who were physically capable, they could withstand it. My own son got COVID-19, but he had only 2 days he had feeling. 3rd day he was okay. He did not take any medicine and nor was he vaccinated. Why? Because he follows the yogic regime, he follows the Ayurvedic regime. So my submission is that we need to go back to our ancient wisdom. We need to explicate the wisdom. I do understand that most of these Ayurvedic texts are in Sanskrit. The first challenge is Sanskrit. The second challenge is the people who go for Ayurvedic degrees. They are the ones who are rejects. Pardon me for saying this. They are not people who go for, usually in India, when people choose their careers, then it is first is engineering and medicine, then it is after you have done graduation, then it is central services. This is the kind of system that most people follow. And the final thing is when you don't then, if you are good, above average, and you can't make it to the allopathic schools of medicine, then you go into Ayurveda. I think this needs to reverse. We need to privilege our indigenous knowledge systems, which are a storehouse of wisdom. If only we could do this, you would find a change. I am myself a transformed person. For the last 2 months, I have been going through an Ayurvedic system and I am bubbling with energy even at this time. It is all, if you could, so my submission is, and I end it over here, that we need to resurrect this information, because the most important thing is me, not the crutches that I need. I don't need any crutches. If the human body has survived countless viruses in the millions of years that it has been on Earth, it is not the first time that it has been challenged by a virus. So why should human beings who had written off death and said that science and technology is the sovereign knowledge system should run for cover at the first instance of a threat to it? So that is my submission. Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to be a part of this discussion. And thanks to all the distinguished speakers for sharing their wisdom.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Dhar, and very well said. And now I would like to extend a vote of thanks, my sincere gratitude to the esteemed panel, to our esteemed chief guest, Shri Saugat Biswasji, to media stalwart, Professor Veerbala Agarwal, session chair, of course, Professor Ravi K. Dhar, then our international speakers, keynote speaker, Professor Robert Chandler, special speaker, Professor Pallavur Vaidyanathan, corporate speaker, Mr. B.D. Sharma, and last but not the least, Professor Sanjeev Bhanawatji, as well as the whole team of GMEC who has worked day and night and who has been providing us technical support. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this. Thank you.